This is it. For real, this is the day that we actually fly this freaking quadcopter. I mean it. I'm re-recording an intro because this was supposed to be part of the previous video in this series. Link to the full series playlist down in the video description if you just stumbled in here and have no idea what I'm talking about. Go back to video 1 and you'll... Here's the thing. When I said, oh, from a pile of parts on the table to a finished quadcopter, it's not just fun for me because I'm making a video for you guys. I love seeing it through to the end. And it's now here it is. I get to fly it. Not just like, yay, I finished that playlist. Thank God. I get to fly it today. Actually, I already did. But through the chronology of YouTube, as far as you know, I haven't flown it yet. And then we're going to fly it. Let's do it. Hey there folks, it's Joshua from the future. Like I told you in the intro, I have flown this quadcopter. Joshua in the past hasn't flown it yet. And I found two small configuration options that need to be tweaked before you go to fly. And since I can't go back in time and insert those in the videos and make you watch them, I'm putting them here. The first thing you need to do is, if you are using the Jumper R1 receiver, like I am, the RSSI only goes up to 50%. And the way to fix that is to do... It is set RSSI underscore scale equals 200. So basically just double, I don't know why, but it only goes from 0 to 50%. By scaling it up to 200, you'll change it from 0 to 50 to 0 to 100, and that's what you want to see. So then we'll hit save. And the other one pertains to the board alignment. The board alignment of the flight controller is not correct, which I'm really surprised to hear because I did put the flight controller properly facing forward, and I didn't think that we were going to have to deal with this. But I guess the moral of the story is you should always check and not assume. So now watch what happens when I tip the quadcopter forward. Do you see that it is rolling left on the 3D model? When I roll it, it's pitching. So the board alignment's incorrect. I guess we need to fix that. The way we fix that is in the configuration tab. It is the board and sensor alignment. And I think what we need to do is we just need to rotate the flight controller 90 degrees on the yaw axis. So it's basically facing left, which is causing pitch to feel like roll and roll to feel like pitch. Let's see if that fixes it. Pitch forward, roll left. Yes, now it's working correctly. So you can see pitch forward. Correct, pitch back, correct, roll right, roll left, and yeah, now that's correct. And I guess we'll need to put this in the video. I'm not really sure. Normally, if you have the flight controller with the arrow facing forward, then that'll be correct. But I made an assumption, I didn't double check it, and now you see what we get as a result. Now the battery that I'm using here is a 4-cell 1500 milliamp hour battery, and this is actually not like the battery that this quadcopter was designed to use, but I actually think you might consider getting a battery kind of like this. Let me tell you why. These motors are, you can see it right there, 1850 kV. And the kV rating of a motor, it's kind of like gearing in a car or a bicycle. The lower the kV, the lower the RPMs that the motor will make. But the kV is multiplied by the battery voltage to get the RPMs. So an 1850 kV motor is really ideal for a 6-cell battery. That's going to have a higher voltage around 25 volts as opposed to this battery, which is going to have a voltage around 15 or 16 volts. But if you take an 1850 kV motor that will just give you rip-snorting performance on a 6-cell battery, and then you use a lower voltage battery, you get less thrust and less power and longer flight times. And it's easier to control. Especially if this is your first build, you should really think about getting a 4-cell, maybe 1500 milliamp hour, maybe a little bigger. A 6-inch prop like this can, and especially on lower kV motors, can handle a little bit more weight. Maybe you could go even up to an 1800 milliamp hour size pack, a little bit larger pack. Going to give you longer flight times. It'll be a little heavier and a little less agile. But I actually think this would be fine, especially if this is your first quadcopter, because you don't want to give a Corvette to a 16-year-old. He's just going to put it in a ditch. The ideal battery, in my opinion, for this is actually a 5-cell battery, maybe around 1,500 or 1,200 milliamp hours, because the larger 6-inch props are going to load the motor more. On a 5-inch prop, 1850 kV on a 6-cell battery is perfect. On a 6-inch prop, you could still run a 6-cell battery. It's just going to, you're going to get a lot of power and a lot of speed and maybe a little bit shorter flights. So I think for a beginner, 4-cell, 1,500 to 1,800 milliamp hour battery. For a typical pilot, 5-cell. The problem is there just aren't that many 5-cell batteries to buy. They're just not that many. They're just not that popular. So 5-cell, maybe 1,200 to 1,500 milliamp hour. And for someone who wants a lot of performance, a 6-cell, maybe 1,250 milliamp hour to maybe a little bit more than maybe 1,500 milliamp hour, depending. The upper end of those battery sizes are heavier batteries for longer range cruising. The lower end of those milliamp hours are lighter batteries for more for performance and speed. I'm still going to use my smoke stopper. So this is 4S, and we are in the off position. And why are we using a smoke stopper? Didn't we check it before? Yeah, what if something went wrong? Okay, and okay, so now the quadcopter is powered up. No smoke, no defaults. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and unplug, and now I'm going to get rid of the smoke stopper box because we need to spin the motors. I just wanted to check that everything was okay. We need to spin the motors. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to arm the quad. And when I arm the quad, the motors will begin spinning. Okay? The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the transmitter. And my transmitter is saying, are you sure you want to do that? Because it sure seems like the quadcopter's still powered up. Do you really want to turn the frickin' thing off? And I'm going to say, yes. Yes, I do want to shut down. And that is what should happen. And this, it's beeping at me now. What we just did there is a fail-safe test. You should do this test on every single build that you do. Take your props off, arm the quad, turn your transmitter off, the motors must stop. And that means that if you're flying the quadcopter and you fly out of range, the quad will not fly off to the land of Neverland where all the lost quadcopters go to live with Peter Pan. It will crash and you'll be able to get it back. If you fail to set failsafe correctly, the quad will fly away. And you should never have, you hear all these stories of people, I built my first quadcopter and it flew away. That's your fault because you didn't know to test failsafe before you flew. Always test failsafe before you fly. All right, what else? I guess another test that we should do is just, we're gonna raise the throttle and see if the quadcopter just like flips out. So here we go, I'm gonna arm. Are we going? There we go. Arm. I'm just going to raise the throttle a little. Nothing bad is happening. I'm going to wiggle the stick. Now you'll notice that when I wiggle the stick, the motors kind of went, but the quad didn't go or anything crazy. In fact, yaw even works with no props on. Good. Now, at this point, the motors are starting to spin. Even though I have lowered the throttle, they're still spinning kind of quickly. That can happen when the props are off. There's nothing wrong with that. Everything we saw there is normal. But if the quadcopter were to kind of go, you probably got a motor spinning the wrong direction. At this point, that shouldn't be happening, but good to check. Let's put the props on. When we look at the propeller has a top and a bottom. Now, you can always tell the top of a propeller because there's lettering embossed on the top. As you get more familiar with props, you will start to recognize that the bottom of the propeller has a kind of a convex shape and the top of a propeller has kind of a concave shape, and you'll just look at a prop and go, oh, it's right side up, it's upside down. But the lettering is always embossed on the top. The propeller has a leading edge and a trailing edge. The leading edge is high and the trailing edge is low. And if you think about it, That's because as the propeller spins, like so, it is pushing air downwards. It's going to spin toward the leading edge, the trailing edge. Okay, so when you look at a propeller, turn it top up, and then identify the high leading edge, and that is the direction that the propeller will spin. Always toward the high leading edge. Now here on the quadcopter, we have the props set up, we have the motors set up in what's called props in, or standard motor rotation direction. And what that means is that the motors are going to rotate towards the center line of the quad. Another way to think of it is, are you hugging or are you swimming? Props in, hugging. Props out, swimming. We are hugging. The quadcopter is going to hug with the props. And that means that when we identify the leading edge of this prop is here, that means that this prop must go on this motor, because it's the leading edge moves forward. This motor is hugging inward. This prop is going to go like that. And we're going to do that for all four. So this prop, first we'll identify the top versus the bottom. No lettering on the bottom. Top. Identify the high leading edge. And we know this prop must spin counterclockwise. And so this prop can go on this motor. And as we look at this from the top down, we can see the high leading edge of the prop facing inward to hug toward the center line. Okay? And then we can put these screws back on. Well, we've got two more props and there's only two more motors, so either they're going to go like this or they're going to go like that. Again, we're going to identify the top, have them both top side up, and then we're going to install the props so that the high leading edge of the prop faces into the center line, because this quadcopter is set up with props in motor rotation. There is a debate over whether props out is better, and I'll link you to a video in the video description below that I made discussing the pros and cons of props out. I built this quad. There's a fairly compelling argument that props out has some advantages, but I had you build this one props in, and the reason I did that is because that is the default for Betaflight, and I didn't think the advantage was compelling enough to deviate in that way. Also, I run all my quads props in because that's just how I've always done it, and I kind of worry that if I had some of my quads props out and some of them props in, that I would forget and I would have a quadcopter try to fly to the moon, which is what will happen if you accidentally get your props on wrong. So we're just doing it the standard way, but you could choose to do it the other way, but you'd have to go back and reverse your motors. And as you tighten them down, you will experience some resistance. Like right about here, I'm starting to experience some resistance before the nut is fully tight. The very first time the nylon insert sort of compresses and deforms, and you just have to kind of give it a little bit more force until you get it all the way down so that the prop is tight against the motor. How tight? How tight do you want it to be? The rule of thumb for me is that if you press with one finger, you should not be able to move the prop. You see, like the motor's moving, but the prop is not sliding. It needs to be snug, but it doesn't need to be, because it's a freaking, if you do it too tight, the hub can shatter. You could damage the motor bell or the shaft. It just needs to be tight enough that, like, you can see I'm, got a little indentation there, right? It's not going anywhere, but that's about how tight it needs to be. It doesn't need to be any tighter than that. And now we install the battery, which you think is like, how hard is that? But there's some thought that goes into it. So when I install the battery, first of all, I want to show you a trick that I use, which is I have rubber bands on my batteries. And the problem that solves is twofold. Number one, this balance lead flops around and gets caught up in the props. This is less of an issue with an under-mounted battery because the props are well away from. With a top-mounted battery, it's really easy for this balance lead to get into the props. But even with an under-mounted battery, it can snag on things as you fly. So I always like to take a rubber band and just put it like so, and that keeps the balance lead up out of the way. There are many different ways to solve this problem. This is just how I've solved it. Also, this tells you that the battery's fully charged, and then when I fly it, I just take it off and I put it like that, and that tells me the battery's discharged. It makes it really easy for me to know which of my batteries are. So I take it off the charger, I go like this. Now it's fully charged. I fly it, take the battery, I'll put it that way. No, it's empty. Okay, so then we're gonna think about, because you might think, well, this is coming out the back, so I want this to come out the back. But that leaves me with all this floppy wire. That's no good, right? I don't want that, because it's gonna get caught up in the prop and get chopped, and that's bad. So let's think about this. I'm gonna have this come like so, and like I don't want to do this because this is gonna be the bottom. If when I land, I'm gonna be landing on these wires. That's bad. This is gonna take some damage. So I think we're gonna turn this sideways, and if I bring it around like this, how's that gonna work? That's gonna So you don't want there to be any tension here that could cause this to unplug itself in flight. You want it to be taut, but not tight, so it pulls loose. So I'm going to just turn this around like so, and that's how I think I'm going to do the battery. Take the battery strap, good and snug, like so. For the record, I don't know if I showed you this, but the battery strap goes underneath, it goes in between the X plate and the bottom plate. It doesn't go up here underneath the ESC. It goes like that, see? Notice how the grip is keeping these screw heads from digging into the battery as well. If we land hard or something, maybe we'll take a hit, but overall it's keeping them from digging in, and that's good. So then we're gonna go like this, and we're gonna plug this in. I'm not gonna plug it in right now because my props are on, I'm indoor, this is not really a safe place to plug in, but that's how we would do it. One final thing I might consider is actually putting this underneath the battery strap, and that will keep it a little bit more contained. I don't think that's necessary here because, like in this case, what's... Activity alarm. I thought for a minute I plugged the battery in. I was like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Made me jump. That's gonna be fine. Is that gonna... Can that still get up into the prop? I guess it could. So if we just take and we pass this like so, now that's good. See, because now we could plug in and this can't go anywhere because this is restrained. I like that. I like that a lot. So we just like that and like that. That's pretty good. That's probably what I would do. So we're going to set it up like that. When we're ready to fly, we'll plug it in, we'll set it down, we'll go fly, we'll have a good time. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that. One more thing that I know you guys are going to want to know the answer to is how to put a GoPro on this guy. With 3D printing, anything is possible, but in this case, rather than have like a specialized mount that's made just for this quad, I've just got this generic mount here. I think it came with a Holy Bro quad, but you can find these. You can find them on 3D printed from Brain 3D, BMC 3D, Race Day Quads. Pick your favorite 3D printing vendor, or if you have a 3D printer, you could print your own. It's just a generic flat bottom one, and it's being held on by zip ties. Now let me show you a tweak that I do, because these zip ties have no leverage. They're really... There's no downward force because this has no thickness. So this actually is not a real secure way to attach it. It can slide around and it can rip off. So what I like to do is I like to get a little bit of that. Oh, you can't see. There you go. You can just barely see it. A little bit of that grip battery pad. And in this case, the thin blue pad, which I happen to have, is actually just fine. If you have the thicker black pad, it's fine too. But it provides some grippiness so it can't slide around. And it provides just a little bit of thickness and compressibility to give these zip ties that just a little bit more downward leverage, if you will. You'll also notice I'm using big, honkin' thick zip ties. Don't use these little guys because these will just rip off in a crash. They will just rip off and you will lose your GoPro. So I really don't prefer to use zip ties if I could possibly avoid it, but in this case, that seems to be the best solution. I should mention that Eachine has a GoPro mount specifically made for this quad, and it actually has a holder for the GPS unit in here as well. that you might elect to use. Personally, I don't like to put the GPS up here. It gets better reception, but then the wire has to run all the way up there. And to me, anyway, you could choose to go that way. But I'll put some links to some GoPro mounts you might be able to use down in the video description, and you can use those. So now it's time to do what I like to call a hover maiden. So it's a maiden, like the maiden voyage of a ship, right? And we're gonna hover the quad. We're just gonna verify that it kind of takes off and hovers. And then we're gonna rip it, okay? So first thing we're gonna do, I'm gonna turn on the radio, and I'm gonna put the switch in the disarm position. The radio should warn, don't worry about that. The radio will warn me if any of the controls are not in the right position. We set that up earlier. Disarm position, and I'm just gonna raise the throttle. That's gonna feel weird if you have any experience with fixed wings, because you always make sure the throttle is down for safety before plugging in. But we have a flight controller, and it's not gonna let us arm if the throttle is up. And so putting the throttle up and the switch in the disarm position is the safest thing to do. Then I'm gonna set the controller down to the side. I like to keep my controller with me, because I don't want some dumbass to pick it up and start fiddling with it. Who would do that? I don't know, but I like to always be able to see it. But I don't like to have it dangling around my neck where it could get joggled or jostled. That joggled isn't a word. You know what I mean. Next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna flip the quadcopter upside down. We want to spend as little time as possible with our hands in the props while the quad is powered up. So if I were to just reach in here like that and try to plug it in, my hands are in the props. I don't want that. So since this is a bottom mount battery, the easiest thing to do is just flip it upside down, and the safest thing to do. And we'll go ahead and plug it in. Okay, now, since this is a brand new build, maybe I'm not quite certain about it, we're just gonna give it a second to see if it does anything crazy. If it does, thank goodness it's upside down. Hopefully it won't. Then we're gonna flip it over and take it to where we're gonna fly it. And on a bottom mount battery, what I like to do is grab it by the battery and turn it to face away from me. I'm always thinking, what if it were to power up an arm right now? And that should never happen, but what if it did? So if I'm holding it like this and it powers up in arms, then it will fly away from me. I don't wanna have my hands in, I don't wanna hold it like that where I could get cut. And you know, if I were in a location with other people, perhaps I wouldn't want to point it at them either. But I definitely don't want to tilt it back and aim it at my face. In order to set it down to fly, I'm going to need to transition off the bottom grip. And I'm going to do that maybe just by holding onto this GoPro. Again, if it were to power up here, I'm holding it securely and it probably wouldn't go anywhere. But this is obviously much more risky than this, right? So I'm going to set it down, get my transmitter, and I'm going to step back. Now, I'm being way more careful about this than many people are. People are a little more casual, and once you get more comfortable and familiar, maybe you could be a little more casual, but especially if this is your first build, I think it's good to start from a position of being way too careful and then sort of slowly dial that back, not too much, but maybe a little more, but I'm showing you the most possible careful thing. So then we're gonna lower the throttle and we're gonna arm, and the motors will begin spinning. Now, through this whole process of the very first hover maiden, we wanna kind of be primed to disarm quickly if anything goes wrong. Nothing went wrong there. We arm, and notice I'm also resting my thumb on the throttle to keep the throttle down. Now, the next thing we do is we're gonna just move the pitch and roll stick gently and just see that the quad pitches and rolls normally, right? Roll right, left, just a little bit, just rock it on the battery and see that it moves correctly, okay? And it is. If it flips out or does anything weird, disarm. And then, now I'm gonna transition over to my normal sort of grip, and I'm going to raise the throttle to bring it to a hover. And we have successfully hover maidened. I'm going to land now, and we are ready to fly. Now I disarmed there, and what I want you to see is that my neutral hand position on the controller is to rest my finger on the arm switch, holding it in the disarm position. And then depending on what I'm doing, either rest my thumb on the throttle to hold the throttle down, or what I discussed earlier in the build, is that as a safety, when you disarm, you should raise the throttle up, and that will prevent the quad from arming. So if you ever see me just walking around with my radio in hand, this is how I'll be holding it. And that is gonna, I'm left-handed, so if you're right-handed, you hold it in the right hand, that might not work as well. I never thought of that. Anyway, that's how you'll see me holding the radio. I'm gonna set my transmitter to the side, keep it near me. I'm gonna come at the quad from underneath maybe, keeping my hands safe, and I'm gonna flip it over, and then I'm going to unplug the battery. And there we go. Let's give this guy a rip. I always like to hit the throttle a little, just to see if it's gonna like death roll. Give it a little bit of a brief full throttle punch. Little flippy flops to see if there's any bobble or, yeah. So it didn't death roll or anything like that. If it's gonna like do a death roll because a motor desyncs, you don't want it to do it at like 100 feet in the air. It seems like it's flying pretty decent. Take me a minute to get used to this 6-inch props, but we are on 4S battery, 1850 kV motors. Little, could stand to have some tuning. Got a little prop wash there. But overall, I think it's flying pretty good. Now you may see in the upper right of my DVR that we have GPS satellites and we have a direction home arrow. We have a miles per hour and so forth. But we did not at any point in this video set up return to home functionality. And the reason for that is that Betaflight's return to home functionality, also known as GPS rescue, I have a video about how to set it up, and you may watch that video and set it up if you prefer. But Betaflight's return to home functionality is it's not reliable. Sometimes it just chooses not to work because it doesn't feel confident that it knows what the quad is doing. So like if there's not enough satellites and you activate return to home, it just disarms the quad and dumps it. If you're too close to your home position, 100 meters, if you're less than 100 meters from your home position, then it just dumps the quad. And so I think if we really want return to home functionality, we should use iNav. And that's the next thing I'm going to be doing in this tutorial is I'm going to take this whole quadcopter and go through an iNav setup. And iNav has much better autonomous flight capabilities. But as far as acro goes, we're doing okay here. We're acroing this guy. Not bad. If you wanted a little more agility, you could put 5-inch props on this. You definitely 5-inch props on 1850 kV with a 4S battery would definitely not make a lot of thrust. It'd be flyable, but especially if you did just choose to go with 5-inch props, you might be more inclined to go with a 6S battery. But you would get a little more agility. It would fly really nice, but on these 6-inch props, it still has plenty of agility, lots, really nice flight time. How about if we try and treat it a little more like a racing quad? Because that's why I picked this 6-inch for this build, is because it kind of splits the difference. You could be like a cruiser, like just a slow cruiser with decent efficiency, flight time, and stability. You could totally do that with this guy. But if you choose to, you can use the 6-inch props and do acro stuff, or you could even put 5-inch props on it and do acro stuff. Oh crap, I didn't put a high def cam on here at all. I guess I'm just gonna be giving you guys the DVR. I meant to put a GoPro on here before I flew it, but I just got carried away. So we're at 4 minutes, 40 seconds flight time. Mix of semi-aggressive acro and cruising. You know, maybe at a 40%, 4 out of 10. Maybe a 5 out of 10 on the aggressiveness scale on average. Like some of that freestyle was closer to a 6 out of 10, but then some of the just cruising was like a 3 out of 10. So it's not like we're full throttle. Reasonably fast on full throttle. It's not like we're full throttle racing when you would probably get closer to 2 minutes, but we're at 3.67 volts and 5 minutes flight time. That's totally respectable. Still got plenty of battery, 3.68. It's starting to get saggy. It's starting to get down to the point where I'd probably bring it in and land it. But you can keep flying it even a little lower than that. The great thing about these 1850 kV motors is that they're on a 4S battery. The motors are spinning at a much lower RPM than they normally would. So you get a lot longer flight time. See, we're at 3.7. Oh, hang on. Watch where you're going, Joshua. 3.7 volts and 6 minutes flight time. But watch, if I land right now, what's the battery going to come up to? And maybe let's land. So let's check what the battery is. 3.73, 3.75, I bet it's going to come up to. That's perfectly fine place to stop flying. You know, generally I want to stop flying when the battery's at about, it's going to rest at about 3.7 to 3.8 volts. I feel like 3.8 is a little high. I could even fly a little bit more because we could, as long as the battery isn't sagging too much, and on these low kV motors, it's not going to sag very much. So if you watch the voltage, as I fly, the voltage drops a little bit. That's called sag, voltage sag. But I still have enough there. See, now I'm getting below 3.5. You saw those stars on the DVR as I hit the throttle. So that's when you start seeing those stars as you pop the throttle, now I saw it hit as low as, I think I saw 3.3. So now we definitely want to bring it in. We're definitely done. You'd never want the battery to go below 3.0 volts at all, ever. And so when you start seeing those stars on screen, that means the battery's going below 3.5 and it's getting close. But if I were not hitting the throttle aggressively and just doing kind of cruising, I could even keep flying a little longer. Now, some people are going to be saying, well, now who wants to cruise like this? Well, especially beginners. Just flying in a straight freaking line is a challenge for a lot of them. So, you know, if all you're doing is just trying to fly in a line or cruise around, and with a 6-inch quad like this, that's certainly reasonable. Yeah. You could fly. I'm over 7 minutes here. Now, granted, I'm not doing anything. I'm barely hitting the throttle, but the minute I touch the throttle, it's going to sag out and I'll need to land. But it just depends on how you're trying to fly. Okay, 8 minutes of lazy flying. See how the battery is. 3.67. That's getting down where I would 3.68. It's going to come up maybe around a 3.7. To me, see, I would have stopped flying earlier than that because I like to hit the throttle and do pops and punches. But this is a fine place, I think, to stop if you're not sagging it out by hitting the throttle. 3.7 is a great place to be. Well, there you go. We have brought it to its final conclusion. Congratulations to you for building a quadcopter from scratch and now flying it. You have done it. And now you can keep doing it. You can do it again with your next build and start building on the knowledge that you got here to, actually spec your own parts, maybe not just from a kit, to repair this thing if it breaks, all that stuff. I hope you had a great time. I'm not done yet, because the next thing I'm going to do is go back and put iNav on this guy. And iNav, did you notice we didn't use the GPS very much? Basically, it tells us how fast we're going, but other than that, we didn't do it because Betaflight support for GPS is kind of crappy. So we're going to have iNav on this, and iNav is a firmware that's going to let us do return to home, GPS-based loiter, automatic flight, where instead of crashing all the time, it just kind of flies itself like a DJI. Yeah, that's what we're going to do next, tomorrow, or maybe next week. But that's going to do it for now. If you are happy flying Betaflight, then you're done here. And I'm really happy to have gone through this journey with you. Thanks for watching. Happy flying.